Ethan Cole found the girl and her German shepherd hiding under a tarp in the Montana snow, and the system swore she didn't exist. No missing report, no name. Just fear in her eyes and frost on her lashes. When a bullet shattered his cabin window days later, he realized someone powerful wanted her silence kept forever. From a forgotten ranger station to a burning cabin. This is a story of guilt, loyalty, and redemption in the heart of a frozen valley. If you believe in second chances, built one soul at a time, like, subscribe, and stay until the very last snowflake falls. The first snow came soft as sifted flour across the Madison Valley, turning the highway pale and quiet. Ethan Cole drove slow in his county cruiser, the heater ticking and the radio muttering static and call signs. It was the kind of winter day when time felt heavy, when you could hear your own breath inside the car and mistake it for company. He'd been with the sheriff's department for 17 years, long enough to know that quiet never lasted. He passed the last mailbox before the foothills and saw the sky flatten into a gray sheet, promising a storm before nightfall. A hawk drifted above the road, patient as regret. He rolled his shoulders, tried the radio again, and caught only the hollow voice of dispatch, giving weather warnings he didn't need to hear. At mile 18, the tires hissed over fresh powder. He slowed at a turnout near a creek and saw through the veil of snow 2 sets of tracks leading off the road, small boots and the round prints of a dog. They cut across the ditch and disappeared into a stand of spruce. He left the engine running, and stepped out into the cold. The wind tasted metallic sharp with the smell of distant smoke. He followed the tracks through the trees until he found a small clearing. There, against the lee of a hill, someone had built a shelter from a blue tarp stretched over broken branches weighted with stones and scraps of wire. Smoke drifted from a length of rusted pipe, stuck through the top. He felt the kind of silence that belongs to places people aren't supposed to live. Ethan took a slow breath, then knocked once on the post. A growl rolled from inside low, even unafraid. The tarp shifted, and a German shepherd pushed through fur-dusted white eyes fixed on him with that clear intelligence you don't forget once you've seen it. "Easy, boy," Ethan said softly, raising his hands. The dog didn't move. From the shadows behind it came a small voice. "Rex, it's okay." A girl stepped out, maybe 10 years old, a cap pulled low, her cheeks raw from wind. Her coat was too large, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs. She looked at Ethan as if she'd already decided not to trust him. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "Storm's coming." She glanced at the clouds like she'd already made peace with the weather. "We'll be fine." "You got someone looking for you?" he asked. "No." She said it plain, not as a challenge, but as a fact. The dog stood between them, tail low, muscles tight. Ethan reached into his coat, careful and slow, and pulled out a paper sack. Inside were a wrapped sandwich, a bottle of water, and a hand warmer. He set it on the ground between them. No tricks. Just food. She didn't move, but the dog sniffed the air. "You can take it," Ethan said. "I'll step back." He did. She watched him the way you watch fire, knowing it can help or hurt. Then she picked up the bag, handed the sandwich to the dog, and tucked the rest behind her. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Mara." "I'm Ethan," he said. "I work for the county. It's my job to check on people, make sure they're safe. We don't need checking." "That dog yours?" "My mom's," she said, and then bit the inside of her cheek like she'd said too much. "She around?" "No." The word was soft but final. Ethan looked at the tarp, the little stove rigged from an old can, the way the ground had been cleared of snow. Someone had taught her survival, but not for long. She couldn't last a week out here. He raised his radio and called dispatch. "Unit 12, he said. "I've located a possible juvenile at grid 31, appears alone, accompanied by a dog." There was a pause, the shuffle of papers, then the operator's calm reply. Unit 12 negative on any missing person reports matching that description. Are you certain of age 10, maybe? Female. Copy. No record statewide in the past month. Repeat, none. Ethan stared at Mara, the dog sitting beside her like a sentry. You sure confirmed 12? The line went dead. He lowered the mic. They say nobody's missing you, he said quietly. Mara shrugged. They never do. She turned back toward the tarp, the dog following. Ethan stood there a long moment, the snow ticking against his jacket, his breath fogging the air. He wanted to tell her he'd seen this before, the kind of disappearance nobody writes reports about. He wanted to say the storm would be worse than she thought, but something in her stillness stopped him. If it gets bad, he said, there's a white house with a red door down County Road 9. That's mine. Knock any time. She didn't answer, just pulled the tarp closed. Ethan walked back to the cruiser, the silence pressing in like a held breath. He started the engine, sat with the heater whining, and looked once more toward the trees. The smoke from her shelter coiled upward until it vanished into the gray sky. He told himself he'd come back before dark, but as he drove toward town, he kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see a child and a dog walking the shoulder behind him, following the same road he'd been on too long, one that always seemed to lead away from what he should have done. The storm gathered on the horizon, a white wall swallowing the mountains, and the radio whispered winter warning temperature falling fast. He touched the wheel tighter and drove on the first turn of the J, already beginning, though he didn't yet know it. By nightfall, the storm had crossed the ridge, turning the world into a white blur. The wind howled through the gaps in Ethan's porch and rattled the loose gutters like bones in a tin can. He had told himself to stay home, to let protocol stand, yet the image of the girl and the shepherd beneath that tarp kept flashing in his mind like a distress flare. At 9, he put on his coat, grabbed a thermos, and drove back toward the forest. The headlights showed only snow twisting in the beam, erasing distance, erasing reason. At the pullout, he parked where he had before. The wind slapped his door when he opened it, stealing his breath. He trudged toward the line of spruce, calling softly, Mara Rex. The trees groaned under their burden of snow. Then he saw the tarp collapsed under a drift. He dug it out with his gloved hands and found nothing but the can stove tipped over ashes, frozen, a torn blanket stiff as cardboard. Tracks led away small, uneven heading toward the valley floor. He followed them for nearly a mile until the flashlight beam caught a patch of motion. The dog's black saddle and the small figure crouched behind him, half buried in snow. She didn't fight when he lifted her, too cold for that, her body stiff in his arms. Rex followed close as he carried them to the cruiser. Inside, the heater gasped and coughed back to life. He wrapped her in his spare jacket. Her lips were pale, but her eyes opened slowly, wary, even as she shivered. You don't quit easy, do you? He said. I told you it would get worse. You found us, she whispered. I wasn't lost. You would have been by morning, he said. She turned her face to the window, the frost already forming along the edges. You'll take me back, she murmured. To them. To the station first, he said. We'll figure the rest after you're warm. She didn't answer. Rex pressed his nose to her arm as if counting her pulse. The sheriff's office sat at the edge of town, a squat brick building that smelled of coffee and wet wool. Ethan carried her inside, past the empty desks to the small break room where a radiator clicked. He made her cocoa from the packet stash and handed it over. She drank without looking up. You have anyone I can call? He asked. No. You sure if there was, I wouldn't be out there? The dog sat at her feet, eyes following every move he made. Ethan took the old wool blanket from the supply closet and laid it across her shoulders. You'll stay here tonight, he said. I'll talk to someone in the morning, see what we can do. What we can do? She repeated as if testing the sound. Her eyes flicked to the bulletin board, to the photographs of deputies lined up in their dress uniforms. She seemed to weigh the world behind those faces and find it lacking. Ethan busied himself with reports, the sound of his pen filling the small room. When he looked up again, she and the dog were asleep on the couch, curled close as if stitched from the same cloth. He turned off the lamp, the storm still rattling the window, and sat in the dark, listening to the creak of the old building. It had been years since he'd heard another heartbeat in his house, and now the sound of her breathing filled a place he hadn't known was empty. He told himself it was duty. He told himself many things before he finally slept. The next sound was the wind's whistle through an open door. The couch was empty, the blanket on the floor. His holster lay on the table, the sidearm gone. He ran outside, the cold hitting him like a slap. Snow still fell soft but relentless. Footprints crossed the parking lot heading toward the highway. He grabbed the flashlight and followed, heart pounding louder than the wind. The prints veered off the main road toward the train tracks, smaller and more staggered now. He followed until the light caught a flash of movement. A shape crouched near a signal post. The shepherd braced beside it. "Mara," he called. She turned, her hair whipped by the wind, his revolver held awkwardly in both hands. "Put it down," he said, walking slowly, palms open. "It's loaded." "I know," she said. Her voice cracked. "They come at night. Men who say they'll help. They take you to new homes. They don't stay." "No one's here now," he said. "Just us. And that's my gun, not yours. People come for kids like me," she said. "And I don't go with them anymore." The words trembled, half anger, half terror. He saw the way her finger wasn't near the trigger, how her arms shook from the cold, more than fear. "I'm not one of them," he said. "You don't have to trust me yet. Just stay alive long enough to decide." Her eyes filled, though she blinked it back. "You'd turn me in." Maybe he admitted, but not tonight. He stepped closer, slow as snowfall. "You're freezing. Let's get warm first." The gun wavered, then dropped into the snow. She stood still as he reached her. Rex pressed against her leg, letting out a small whine. Ethan picked up the revolver, slipped it into his belt, and draped his coat around her shoulders. "Come on," he said. "We'll go to my place for the night. The heater's better there." She hesitated, then nodded once, exhaustion finally outweighing suspicion. They walked back through the white silence, the storm easing into a steady fall. The town's lights glowed faint in the distance, like a promise that could still be broken. By the time they reached his truck, her steps had slowed to half his. He lifted her into the seat, wiped the frost from her hair, and started the engine. She leaned against the window, half asleep, Rex curled at her feet. Ethan stared at the wipers cutting their slow rhythm across the glass. He knew tomorrow would bring questions, reports, maybe worse. But for the first time in years, the thought of facing them didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a beginning. The drive to the cabin took them along a back road the plows hadn't touched yet. Snow whispered under the tires, steady and hypnotic, and the headlights picked up only the falling flakes that seemed to hang in the air before vanishing. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the heater vents. Mara sat beside him, bundled in a blanket that smelled faintly of coffee and pine soap. She hadn't spoken since they left town. Rex's head rested across her knees, his breath fogging the window. When they turned off onto the logging trail, she finally asked, "Where are we going?" "A place that used to be my father's," Ethan said. "It's quiet. Nobody checks it anymore." "Why not?" "Because it's too far from everything he said. That's the point." The cabin appeared as a shadow among darker trees, a single light flickering from the porch lantern he'd left there in better days. He parked close and stepped out first, the wind cutting through the seams of his coat. The air smelled of cedar and smoke from some distant chimney. He opened the door and motioned her inside. The old place creaked in welcome boards, dry as old bones. He hadn't been here since the funeral 5 winters back, but the furniture still held the shape of a life. paused mid-breath, a coat on a peg, an empty mug by the stove, the ghost of his father's handwriting on a calendar that ended in June. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll stay by the fire." She set her small pack on the floor, her eyes scanning the corners as if to check for exits. Rex circled twice and dropped near the hearth tail, sweeping a slow rhythm. Ethan knelt to light the fire, and when the flames caught, the room filled with a glow that made the walls seem closer, safer. "You can sleep," he said. "The storm's worse out there." She nodded but didn't lie down. "You'll get in trouble for this," she said. Probably he answered, smiling just enough to soften the truth. "But that's tomorrow's problem." She looked at him for a moment, maybe to see if he meant it, then finally pulled the blanket tighter and curled up beside the dog. He watched until her breathing steadied, then leaned back in the chair, the fire painting her face in amber and shadow. Something in that small, stubborn piece stirred the ache he'd carried since the night the phone call came, the night he waited, instead of going the night his world broke. Morning came blue and brittle. The storm had passed, leaving the snow crusted in sunlight. Ethan stepped outside to fetch more wood, the cold biting his skin awake. The road was still buried. They were alone for now. When he came back, Mara was feeding Rex a piece of bread from her pack, her face less guarded. "He likes you," Ethan said. "He likes anyone who doesn't lie," she replied, her tone mild, not accusing. He didn't answer. Instead, he showed her how to warm water for Coco on the stove, how to use the flue handle to keep smoke from backing up. She watched closely, quick to learn quiet in a way that made the cabin feel less empty. After breakfast, she sat near the window, drawing shapes in the frost with her fingertip mountains, he guessed, or clouds pretending to be them. He spent the day checking the radio and keeping the fire alive, telling himself the storm had made the roads impassable, that he couldn't have delivered her to social services even if he tried. He told himself many things that weren't lies, exactly, just softer versions of what he wanted to believe. By late afternoon, the light had turned thin. A truck engine rumbled up the trail tires, crunching through ice. Ethan's heart stopped for a beat. Only one man in the county used that route uninvited. The sheriff. Ethan stood quickly, motioning Mara toward the small pantry beside the stairs. "Stay there," he whispered. "Don't make a sound." She nodded, pulling Rex with her. The dog went willingly, but his ears stayed high alert. A knock came, 3 solid raps that shook the old hinges. Ethan opened the door to find Sheriff Rowland on the porch, breath-fogging uniform dusted white. "Didn't expect to find you out here," Rowland said, his smile tight. "Heard your unit was off duty." "Checking the property," Ethan replied. "Thought I'd ride out before the next storm." Rowland looked past him into the cabin, eyes tracing the single bed, the 2 mugs on the table. "You've got company." "Just me," Ethan said. "And memories." Rowland's chuckle was low. "You always did like your solitude. That's what I tell folks when they ask why you never left this county." "Guess I'm stubborn," Ethan said. The sheriff's gaze lingered another second before turning back to the doorway. "We've had reports," Rowland said. "A runaway girl, maybe with a dog. You see anything like that, you let me know." "Of course," Ethan said. "I'll keep my eyes open." Rowland tapped the door frame, his tone casual. "You remember what happened to Carter when he got soft about protocol? Paperwork's one thing, loyalty's another." "I remember," Ethan said, quietly. The sheriff smiled again, too easily, and stepped off the porch. The crunch of his boots faded down the trail. Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, the air thick with what he hadn't said. From the pantry came a faint rustle. Mara pushed the door open a few inches, eyes wide, skin pale in the firelight. He knew she whispered. "He suspects," Ethan said. "That's different." Rex emerged beside her. The hair along his spine raised a low rumble in his chest. Ethan crouched to rub the dog's neck. "Easy, boy. He's gone." But the rumble didn't fade. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. The kind that came from scent memory, something deeper than thought. "What's wrong with him?" Mara asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the window where Roland's tracks already blurred under drifting snow, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Sometimes, he said finally, dogs remember things people forget. He stirred the fire until sparks climbed the chimney. Outside, the valley lay still and white, yet in that stillness he sensed the world shifting, a quiet thread forming beneath their fragile peace. The next few days settled into a fragile rhythm, the kind that feels borrowed rather than earned. The storm passed, leaving the world clear and brittle sunlight flashing off the snowfields like broken glass. Ethan woke early, chopped wood behind the cabin, and kept the fire alive. Mara fed Rex from the last of the canned food, humming to herself under her breath, a sound so faint it could have been the memory of a song. The cabin began to look less like a hiding place and more like a home, if only for now. Ethan showed her how to mend the door hinges, how to patch a leak in the roof using tar and strips of tin. She worked with focus, her small hands sure her sleeves rolled past her elbows. "You've done this before," he said. "I helped my mom," she replied, and there was both pride and loss in her voice. He didn't press further. They spent the afternoon clearing snow from the porch, their breath hanging in the crisp air. The sound of Rex pacing beside them, the only rhythm between words. When the work was done, they stood back to look at what they'd built, a cabin that no longer sagged under neglect, but stood straight and dignified against the white. Mara smiled, and Ethan realized he hadn't seen that kind of smile in years, the simple kind that asks nothing in return. That evening, as he sat by the fire sorting through old papers from his father's desk, Mara wandered the small room, exploring the shelves stacked with tools and weathered books. She picked up his coat from the chair to hang it, and a photograph slipped from the pocket, landing face up on the floor. A boy stared out from it, about her age, with the same brown eyes as Ethan's, but brighter unshadowed. "Who's this?" she asked, holding the photo carefully between her fingers. Ethan looked at it for a long time before answering. "That's my son," he said quietly. His name was Luke. Was she asked, her voice soft as though she already knew the answer. He and his mother were in an accident, he said. A storm like this one. I waited for help instead of going myself. He took the picture from her and stared at it, the firelight trembling across his face. I thought I was doing the smart thing. I thought waiting would be safer. Mara didn't move closer, but her eyes softened. "My mom used to say waiting's just another way to be afraid," she whispered. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was shared like two hands cupping the same flame. Over the next mornings, the routine continued. Ethan taught her how to read a compass, how to tell when the clouds were changing direction, how to listen for the sound of an approaching storm long before it showed itself. She taught him without meaning to how to speak again without apology. They repaired the fence by the edge of the clearing, hauled more firewood, and took walks down the narrow trail to the frozen creek where Rex ran ahead, chasing scents only he could name. The world outside remained cold and wide, but inside the cabin something smaller and warmer began to take root. When she laughed now, it wasn't guarded. When he looked at her, the guilt that used to weigh him down felt lighter, as if grief had finally found somewhere to rest besides his chest. One night, as Mara dozed with Rex's head on her lap, Ethan sat at the table reviewing old case files on his laptop. The generator hummed outside, steady but faint. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just routine work to keep himself from thinking too much. He opened a folder marked Closed. 2014, one he hadn't touched in years, and scrolled through names. That's when he saw it. Brennan Lila. Homicide, February 12th. The last name struck him like a tap on a cracked bell. Brennan. He opened the report. The details came slow-typed in the sterile language of law robbery, gone wrong. Suspect never charged, single child missing from scene, presumed relocated. The photo attached was grainy, but the woman's eyes were unmistakable. Mara's eyes older, softer still, watching the world with quiet defiance. He stared until the words blurred, then scrolled to the investigator's signature at the bottom. Lead Detective Sheriff Roland Hayes. Ethan leaned back, the chair creaking. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the fire too loud. He read the name again, the letters cold as the badge that man wore. Roland, the same sheriff who'd stood on this porch just days ago smiling, asking about a runaway girl. He closed the file, his pulse hammering in his ears. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the world was cruel in circles. But deep down, the part of him that had survived 20 years of patrol and loss knew better. The way Rex had reacted. The way Roland's eyes had lingered. He looked across the room at the girl asleep beside the fire, her hair haloed by its light, the dog guarding her like a sentinel carved from loyalty itself. He thought of the sheriff's warning about loyalty and protocol, the tone that had carried something darker than authority. He stood, turned off the screen, and went to the window. The moon was out pale against the frost. Beyond the trees, he thought he saw a faint light moving, maybe a car on the road, maybe something else. He couldn't tell. The wind brushed the cabin walls like a whisper trying to find its way in. He sat back down, watching the girl breathe, and told himself that what he'd just learned changed nothing, though he knew it changed everything. He would keep her safe, no matter what that meant for him. As the night deepened, the fire burned low, and Ethan stared at the photograph of Luke and the case file that should have stayed buried. In one, the past he'd lost. In the other, the truth that might take what little he'd rebuilt. He closed the file gently, feeling the edge of it cut like ice. The wind carried a sound that could have been distant thunder or maybe just the first tremor of something waiting to break. By the fifth day, the weather turned mean again. The sky darkened, without warning, wind building in long moans that curled down the valley like an animal searching for warmth. Ethan had heard the forecast that morning over the radio. Before the signal faded into static Arctic front whiteout conditions, travel suspended after sunset. He checked the generator twice, stocked the stove with wood, and told himself the storm would pass like all the others, though something about the pressure in the air felt different, heavier, expectant. Mara helped him board the windows with extra planks. Her hands were red from cold, her movements quick but quiet. Rex trotted between them, restless, his nose to the floorboard's ears flicking toward sounds only he could hear. "It's going to get rough," Ethan said, handing her another nail. "You've seen rough," she answered with a small shrug. He almost smiled, but didn't. There were things she shouldn't have seen at her age. Things that shouldn't have to repeat. By evening, the world outside had vanished. The cabin walls shuddered under the weight of the wind, snow sweeping across the windows like white smoke. The lights flickered twice, then went out completely, leaving them in the dim orange of the fire. The generator sputtered, coughed, and died. Ethan checked the fuel line, found it frozen solid. The radio gave one last burst of static and then silence. No dispatch, no outside world. Just the three of them and the storm pressing closer. He moved through the cabin, lighting candles, their small flames trembling. Mara sat near the fire with Rex curled beside her eyes, following him as he worked. "We lost power," he said. "Does that mean no one can find us?" she asked. "For now," he admitted. "But it also means no one else can either." Her gaze met his, sharp but trusting enough to make his chest tighten. He pulled a blanket over her shoulders and checked the rifle by the door. the habits of a man who had seen what desperation does to people when roads close and cold grows teeth. Later, he stepped outside to secure the last of the firewood tarp. The storm hit him like a wall, snow slicing sideways, the wind howling hard enough to make his breath catch. The night had no shape, just a blur of white and black and sound. He tied the ropes fast and turned back toward the door. That was when he noticed it, a pair of fresh tire tracks at the edge of the clearing, nearly buried but still visible, curving toward the tree line. He scanned the woods, saw nothing but swirling snow, though he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there watching. When he went back inside, Mara was standing by the window. "Someone's out there," she whispered. Rex heard them. The dog was rigid, his body a line of tension. "Could be a hunter stuck in the storm," Ethan said, though the words rang hollow even to him. He poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove, needing the normal motion of a simple act. Hours passed. The storm raged, battering the roof, shaking the door on its hinges. They spoke little. Ethan cleaned the rifle, then sat near the window, listening to the wind shift from a low moan to a whistling scream. Mara dozed against Rex's side, her hand buried in his fur. The dog didn't sleep. His eyes tracked every creak, every sound. When the fire burned low, Ethan added more logs, watching sparks climb the chimney like prayers lost on their way up. He thought about calling the sheriff, though the radio was dead. He thought about that case file with Roland's signature, and the way the man's smile never reached his eyes. He wondered if the sheriff knew what he knew now, and what a man like that might do to keep old ghosts buried. Close to midnight, the storm seemed to pause. The wind fell away, replaced by a silence so complete it rang in the ears. Ethan stood uneasy. "Stay here," he told Mara softly. He stepped toward the door hand on the latch, listening. Nothing but the slow ticking of snow sliding off the roof. Then it came a sharp sound, brief and absolute, like the world inhaling. The window behind him shattered. The gunshot's echo folded into the storm. Splinters and glass sprayed across the room. Rex barked once, deep and furious, positioning himself between Mara and the window. Ethan dropped low, pulled her toward the hearth. "Down," he said, voice steady out of habit, more than calm. She clutched Rex's collar, her eyes wide but dry. He reached for the rifle, crawled to the edge of the window frame, and peered into the darkness. The wind had risen again, dragging the snow sideways. He saw nothing but white and shadow, no muzzle flash, no movement. Whoever had fired was gone or waiting. He stayed crouched until the cold crept through the boards, then closed the wooden shutters and pushed a dresser against the wall for cover. Mara sat by the fire again, her small hands trembling as she fed kindling into the flames. "They found us," she said. Maybe he said quietly. Or maybe they just want us scared. "It worked," she whispered. "Not yet," he replied. He checked the door locks again, the rifle loaded, then sat across from her. The firelight flickered over her face, and for the first time he saw not defiance, but exhaustion, the kind that comes when even children understand danger's shape. He wanted to promise safety, to say the kind of words parents use to chase away fear, but he had learned that promises made in storms rarely survive the morning. Outside, the wind screamed again, covering the sound of retreating footsteps, if there were any. Inside, the three of them waded through the long dark, the cabin a small island of warmth in a sea of ice. When dawn finally came, gray and slow, the world looked unchanged, yet something in it had shifted. The bullet hole in the wall was clean centered at chest height, a message written without words. Ethan touched the splintered wood and knew it wasn't random. Someone out there wanted them to know they were being watched. He didn't tell Mara that, not yet. She was feeding Rex, pretending not to see the way his hand lingered on the mark. "The storm's ending," she said. "Yes," he said, watching the gray light crawl across the floor. "But something else is just starting." At dawn, the snow stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. The bullet hole above the window had turned the cabin from shelter to target. Ethan didn't wait for the next warning. He packed the essentials into his old duffel: food, water, ammunition, a map folded so many times the edges had softened like cloth. Mara sat at the table, pale but composed, her hands moving over Rex's fur as if the rhythm might hold her steady. "We're leaving," he said. "Now." "Where?" she asked. "There's an old ranger station west of here, halfway up Pine Ridge. Used to be a firewatch post before the state shut it down. If we can reach it before nightfall, we'll have walls and height." "Will they follow?" she asked. He hesitated. "If they want us, they already are." That was all the truth he could bear to give. They stepped into the morning light, the world washed clean and endless, a sea of white unbroken, except for the narrow path leading through the trees. The air was bitter enough to sting lungs and eyes. Ethan tightened the straps on the duffel and handed Mara a scarf. "Stay close," he said. She nodded, pulling the wool around her face. Rex trotted ahead, pausing every few yards to check the air, his black and tan coat stark against the snow. The first mile was steady, the sound of their boots and the dog's paws, the only proof they still existed. After a while, the cold found the seams in their clothes and bit through. Mara's cheeks turned red, then pale. Ethan slowed his pace, matching hers. "You doing all right?" he asked. "I've walked worse," she said, though her voice trembled. He admired her defiance, that small spark of stubbornness that refused to die, the same spark that reminded him too much of Luke. By noon, they reached the old service road that wound up Pine Ridge. The sky had gone flat again, a gray lid pressing down. Ethan checked his compass, the needle twitching nervously, then pointed west. "Another 2 miles, he said. "You see that rise up there? That's where it sits." She followed his gaze, squinting at the faint outline of a tower barely visible through the haze. The slope grew steeper, the drifts deeper. Each step sank to their knees, forcing them to fight for inches. Ethan took the lead, breaking a path. Behind him, Mara trudged without complaint, Rex circling her, nudging her boots when she lagged. They reached the ridge line just as daylight began to thin. The ranger station appeared like a mirage, 2 weather-beaten cabins and a skeletal tower of rusted steel. The door of the first building hung crooked, half open, creaking in the wind. Ethan raised his rifle, motioning for Mara to stay back. He entered first boots, crunching on old glass. The air smelled of dust, kerosene, and something faintly metallic. He swept the flashlight across the room, overturned chairs, a desk shelves lined with moldy binders. A stove sat in the corner, rusted but usable. He felt the heat of his own breath against the scarf. "It's clear," he said, finally. Mara stepped inside with Rex at her heel. "It's warmer than outside," she said, voice hopeful. Ethan nodded, though warmth wasn't what concerned him. He set down the duffel, checked the windows, and lit a small flame on the stove. The blue flicker sprang to life, chasing the shadows into corners. They ate quietly, sharing the last of the jerky and canned beans. For the first time in days, the silence didn't feel hostile. Mara leaned against the wall, eyes half closed, while Rex stretched beside her. Ethan watched the snow fall beyond the broken window panes, small flakes swirling like ash. He almost believed they'd made it, that they'd outrun whatever hunted them. The thought came fragile but seductive. Maybe they could stay, wait out the danger, let the world forget. But survival has its own ways of reminding you who's in charge. As the light faded, Ethan noticed something on the floor near the stove, a crushed cigarette butt, fresh, not old enough to be brittle. He knelt, touched it. Still warm. His stomach tightened. He looked around, seeing details he'd missed before: footprints half covered by dust, a coffee mug overturned with a ring of moisture still clinging to its edge, a half-empty can of soup on the counter. He moved to the desk and found a handheld radio lying on its side, the power light blinking weakly. He picked it up. The casing was warm to the touch. He felt the faint hum of a signal still open, a whisper of static breathing in and out like a living thing. Someone had been here maybe minutes before they arrived. "Mara," he said quietly. She sat up, sensing the change in his tone. "What is it?" "We're not alone," he said. Rex lifted his head, ears pointed toward the door. The air seemed to thicken. A single snowflake drifted through the gap in the window and landed on the floor between them, melting instantly, as if to mark the boundary between safety and what waited outside. "Who?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "But they're close." He turned off the radio, set it down gently, and crossed to the door. The wind outside had died to a low murmur, deceptive in its calm. He pressed his hand to the wood. It was cold but not empty. Something beyond it made the air vibrate faintly. Rex growled the sound deep and low. Ethan motioned for silence. For a long moment there was nothing. Then far off a branch snapped. Another. The kind of sound made not by weather, but by intention. Ethan stepped back, closed the bolt on the door, and doused the stove's flame until the room sank into dim orange half-light. "We wait," he whispered. Mara nodded, pulling Rex close, the dog's heartbeat steady against her arm. The snow began to fall harder again, whispering against the roof, hiding all tracks, but never the feeling of pursuit. Ethan sat with his back to the wall rifle across his knees, watching the door. He didn't know who was out there or how much they knew, only that escape had become illusion. Freedom, like the flame he'd just extinguished, could be lit again, but never without smoke. The ranger station creaked through the night, its old timbers settling in the cold like bones remembering pain. Outside, the storm whispered against the walls, steady and secretive. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat near the window watching the snow drift past in thin ribbons, the rifle across his knees. The radio lay dark on the table, its faint hum gone silent when he'd cut the battery to keep it from betraying them. Mara slept beside the stove, wrapped in his coat, her breath fogging the air with small bursts that reminded him of life itself, fragile, fleeting, but stubborn enough to persist. Rex was a dark shadow against her legs, alert, even in rest. Ethan stared into the dim orange glow of the embers and felt the weight of years pressing down, the kind that no badge or good intention could ever lift. By morning, the wind had calmed, but the cold had deepened. He stepped outside to check the perimeter, the rifle slung over his shoulder. The snow reached his shins, and the silence had that peculiar thickness that comes after violence. He found no new tracks, no sign of the watcher who'd been there before. Still, the feeling of being hunted hadn't left him. It had only changed shape, becoming quieter, more patient. When he came back inside, Mara was awake, staring into the dead stove. "We need to move soon," he said. She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the single strip of light spilling through the window. "You're thinking about your mother," he said. She nodded slowly. "I dream about her," she whispered. "She's always calling me from another room. I go to find her, but the door won't open." Ethan hesitated, then sat beside her. "You can tell me what happened," he said. She looked at him, her expression both older and younger than her years. "You first," she said. He almost smiled, but it died before it reached his lips. "What do you want to know?" "What you're running from," she said. Her voice wasn't accusing, it was curious, almost kind. He took a long breath, the kind that hurts going in. "It was 5 winters ago," he said. "There was a call. A vehicle overturned on Route 12 ice, on the bridge heavy snow. I was supposed to respond." He stared at the floorboards, remembering the night in snapshots, the radio static, the hesitation, the fear of losing control on that road. Dispatch said the plows hadn't cleared yet. He continued. "They said to wait until the highway patrol could make it through. I waited. By the time we got there, it was too late. He swallowed hard. My wife and son were in that car. The words hung in the cold air like frost suspended before falling. Mara didn't move. Even Rex seemed to hold still. "You didn't know it was them?" she said finally. "No," he whispered. "Not until I saw the plates. But I knew it was bad and I still waited. I thought I was keeping everyone safe. Instead, I lost everything that mattered." His voice cracked, the sound raw and unfinished. "I keep telling myself I did the right thing. But right doesn't mean good. It doesn't bring them back." The silence after his confession was the kind that settles deep, not empty, but full of understanding. Mara reached out her small hand, resting on his sleeve. "My mom used to say people die twice," she said softly. "Once, when their heart stops, and again when someone stops saying their name." "You still say theirs, don't you?" Ethan nodded. "Every day." "Then they're not gone," she said. Her words simple as they were cut through the years of guilt with a gentleness he hadn't expected. He wanted to thank her, but before he could, her gaze shifted, her face tightening. "Ethan," she said, "I have to tell you something too." He leaned forward, bracing himself. "It's about my mother," she said. "You said you read her file." He nodded. "There's something that file doesn't say." She drew a breath, her hands clenched in her lap. "It wasn't a robbery. The man who came to our house wore a badge." Ethan froze. He said he was helping her with a report. "I was in the next room. I heard her yell. When I came out, she was on the floor. Her voice shook, but she didn't cry. He saw me. He told me to run. I did. But I never forgot his face." Ethan's stomach turned cold. "Mara," he said quietly. "Who was he?" She looked straight at him, her eyes clear and unblinking. "Sheriff Rowland." The name landed like a hammer. The room seemed smaller, the air thinner. "You're sure he asked?" "I saw him again," she said. "At the gas station outside town last year. He didn't recognize me, but I remembered him." She took a shaky breath. "Mom told me before she died that she'd found something wrong at her job, money missing from the county fund. She said someone powerful was behind it. Then he came." Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead, his pulse pounding. The sheriff's warnings, the way Rex had reacted, the bullet through the window, all of it snapped together in a grim pattern. He felt sick, realizing what had been in front of him all along. "He covered it up," Ethan said. "He called it a robbery and closed the file." "You believed him," Mara said quietly. "All of you did." Her words weren't meant to wound, but they did. He remembered that winter, his own silence, the comfort of following orders, of not asking questions that might bring trouble. He'd told himself the system was bigger than him, that truth wasn't his job if someone else signed the report. He had been wrong then, and now a child carried the weight of that cowardice. He looked at her, and the grief in her eyes felt like a mirror held too close. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were barely a whisper. "I should have seen it." She shook her head. "You see it now," she said. "That's what matters." But it didn't feel like enough. Outside, the storm had faded to a hush, but inside another one began to rise. Ethan stared at the cracked window pane where the first light of morning touched the glass. In that faint reflection, he saw a man who had failed to act when it mattered, and now finally could no longer afford to. By afternoon, the wind had died, leaving the forest still and brittle branches heavy with ice. Ethan stared at the recorder on the table, a small black device no bigger than his palm, the kind deputies used for field notes. He'd found it in the duffel that morning and replaced the batteries. Its red light glowed faintly in the shadows. "We're going to end this," he said. Mara looked up, her face pale but determined. "How?" "He'll come for us." Ethan replied. "He wants the truth buried for good. That means he'll have to look me in the eye to do it." He checked the rifle, loaded 2 spare magazines into his pocket, and holstered the small sidearm he'd kept since patrol days. "When he comes, I'll talk to him. You stay hidden until I call." "You can't trust him," she said. "I don't," he answered. "That's why I'm recording." The sun began to fall behind the ridge, turning the snow gold for a brief moment before surrendering to gray. The quiet was unnatural, like the land holding its breath. Ethan knew the sheriff's habits. Roland was a man who preferred confrontation when he held the power, and tonight he thought he did. Sure enough, the sound came just after dusk, the grind of tires through snow, slow and deliberate. Ethan motioned Mara into the storage room. Rex followed his ears, twitching, but his eyes never left the window. "Stay," Ethan whispered. The dog hesitated, then obeyed, tail low ready. Ethan slipped the recorder into his coat pocket, pressed the button, and stepped outside. The sheriff's truck sat at the base of the trail headlights, off engine, idling low. Roland climbed out, his silhouette broad against the pale snow, the brim of his hat rimmed with frost. "You've had a busy week, Cole," he said, his tone almost casual. "Storms, missing persons, old case files stirred up. You got something you want to tell me?" "I think you already know," Ethan said. "You came all the way up here to make sure I don't say it." Roland smiled, thin and humorless. "I came because I'm your friend, Ethan. Because I know what grief does to a man. Makes him see ghosts where there aren't any." "You mean like the one you made out of Lila Brennan?" The name hit its mark. Roland's jaw flexed. "Careful," he said. "Words like that can get a man in trouble." Ethan stepped closer, boots crunching. "You killed her," he said evenly. "You called it a robbery. Sealed the file, and no one asked why a county auditor ended up dead days after finding money missing from your fund." Roland's eyes hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," Ethan said, "and the rest you just confirmed." He reached into his coat fingers, brushing the recorder's edge. "You think you can scare me quiet again? That was my mistake once. I won't make it twice." Roland took a slow step forward. "You were a good deputy," he said softly. "Smart enough to know when the system wins. But you've been chasing ghosts so long you forgot what's real." "She's real," Ethan said. "Her daughter's real, and she remembers your face." The sheriff's smile faltered. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine. "Where is she?" Roland asked. "Safe." Ethan lied. The sheriff's gaze flicked toward the cabin. "That dog of hers," he said, "good animal. Shame if something happened to it." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You can walk away." Roland's eyes narrowed. "So can you." The last thing Ethan saw was the sheriff's hand sliding under his coat. He dove sideways as the first shot cracked through the cold, splintering the porch post. Snow exploded around him. He fired back once, a warning hitting the ground near Roland's boots. Enough, he shouted. "It's over." But it wasn't. From inside the cabin came Rex's bark, fierce, urgent, followed by Mara's scream. Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned sprinting through the doorway just as the window shattered behind him. Roland had circled the cabin, a can of fuel in hand, pouring it along the outer wall. Flames caught quick, greedy against the dry wood. Ethan grabbed the fire blanket, tried to smother the spreading blaze, but the heat was rising too fast. "Mara," he called. She was crouched in the corner. Rex pressed against her, teeth bared at the doorway. The sheriff stepped into the threshold, revolver drawn, his face ghosted orange by firelight. "Move, Ethan," he said. "This doesn't have to get worse. You've already done your worst," Ethan said, placing himself between Mara and the gun. Roland raised the weapon. It happened in an instant. Rex lunged. The sound of the shot filled the room like thunder. The dog hit Roland mid-chest, knocking him back, but the bullet found its mark first. Rex collapsed near the door, whimpering once, then still. Mara screamed, reaching for him, but Ethan caught her arm. Smoke poured from the walls, thick and choking. "We have to go," he said, voice breaking. She shook her head, tears cutting clean lines through the soot. "He saved me," she whispered. "He saved us both." Ethan knelt, his hands trembling as he touched Rex's fur already cooling beneath his palm. "I know," he said. "He did what good souls do." Behind them, Roland stumbled toward his truck, clutching his shoulder. Ethan followed, rage and grief merging into something cold and precise. He fired once at the front tire, once at the rear. Both blew with a dull thud, rubber shredding. "You're not leaving," Ethan said. Roland turned gun trembling in his hand, but Ethan raised his own, and the sight line between them went steady. Neither spoke. The snow began to fall again, slow and silent, the fire behind them crackling its last. When the sheriff finally dropped his weapon, Ethan lowered his too. "You're done," Ethan said quietly. "You'll answer for everything." Roland's voice came hoarse through the smoke. "You think they'll believe you?" "They will," Ethan said, his throat tight. "I have your confession." The recorder in his pocket still blinked red, the tiny light catching the reflection of the flames. He turned back to the cabin, but the roof had begun to cave. Inside, the heat glowed like the heart of a dying sun. Mara knelt beside Rex, her small frame shaking, the dog's collar clutched in her hands. Ethan dropped beside her, pulling her close as the walls groaned and gave way. Snow fell harder, hissing against the fire until only smoke remained. The forest swallowed the sound, leaving nothing but the smell of ash and the memory of a dog's last loyalty. The cabin was gone by morning, reduced to a black scar against the snow. Smoke drifted in low ribbons across the valley, stinging the air with the smell of ash and pine. Ethan stood on the ridge, his coat torn, his face gray from smoke and loss. Mara knelt beside what was left of Rex's resting place, her hands red from digging through the half-frozen earth. She had buried him where the first light touched the snow. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind whispering through the burnt timbers, carrying with it the last warmth of everything they'd built. Ethan's arm hung useless at his side, blood seeping slow through his sleeve from a graze that had cut deep. His breath came thin and uneven. The recorder still sat in his pocket, its battery nearly dead, but the red light blinked steady proof of truth, small and defiant against the ruin around them. Roland was alive. Ethan could see him down the slope, limping toward his truck, trying to patch one of the tires he hadn't destroyed. The sheriff's face was hard to read through the distance and the haze, but the movement was clear he was trying to finish what he'd started. Ethan turned to Mara. "You have to go," he said. "Take the ridge trail west. Follow it until you hit the old power line road. Someone will find you." She shook her head, clutching Rex's collar. "I'm not leaving you." "You are," he said, voice rough. "This ends with him, not you." She looked at him, her eyes wet but fierce. "You can't fight him alone." "I'm not fighting," he said. "I'm buying you time." He pulled the recorder from his pocket and pressed it into her hands. "If I don't make it, you keep this safe. It's the truth. Take it to the sheriff's office in Madison County, not here. Ask for Deputy Green. He'll believe you." "You come with me," she said. "I will." He lied the same way a parent lies when the world is too cruel for honesty. He waited until she was out of sight, the sound of her footsteps fading into the trees. Then he took the long way down, circling behind the sheriff's truck. Roland was cursing under his breath, trying to pry a frozen jack from the snow. Ethan raised his rifle, steadying it with his good arm. "It's over, Roland," he called. The sheriff straightened slowly, one hand hovering near his holster. "You should have stayed down," he said. "You had your chance to die quiet. You had your chance to live honest. Ethan replied. Roland's mouth twitched. That recording of yours won't mean much if no one hears it. It already has, Ethan said, clicking the transmitter on his radio. A faint beep responded, weak but alive. Before dawn, he'd wired the recorder to the radio's emergency channel and left it transmitting slow but steady, repeating every 30 seconds. They're hearing you confess right now, he said. Every word. Roland's eyes flicked toward the antenna still standing near the ruins. Then he moved. The gunfire came almost together. 2 flashes, 1 echo. Ethan felt the burn in his side before he heard the second shot hit the snow near his boot. He stumbled, but fired once, hitting Roland in the leg. The sheriff fell yelling in pain, his revolver clattering away into the drifts. You think this changes anything? Roland gasped. Men like me built this county. They'll bury it all again. Maybe Ethan said, gripping his wound, but not with her still breathing. He stepped closer, kicked the revolver aside, and pointed his rifle at the man's chest. You're done. Roland's breath came ragged, his eyes already dulling from the cold. You're bleeding out too, he said. We both know it. Ethan lowered the rifle slowly. Difference is, I can live with what I've done. You can't. He turned away, leaving the man in the snow. He didn't get far. The cold was faster than he expected, creeping from his legs upward, turning pain into numbness. He made it to the ridge where the wind cut hardest and fell to his knees. The world tilted, the trees bending with it. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, each breath shorter, thinner. He thought of Luke, and of the night he'd waited instead of going. He thought of how many second chances the world gives and how few men take them. Not this time, he whispered. He pulled the radio closer and pressed the button again. Unit 12, he rasped. Transmission active. Evidence. Send help. Static answered him. Then faint voices so far away they could have been ghosts. He smiled through the pain, the kind of smile that doesn't need witnesses. The world dimmed. Snow began to fall again, soft and forgiving. He lay back, eyes on the gray sky. Somewhere above, a hawk circled a black mark against the white. He thought of Rex, of the loyalty in those eyes, of Mara's small hand gripping his sleeve that night by the fire. He had promised to protect her. Maybe he finally had. He didn't hear the distant shout at first, just a name carried on the wind, faint and desperate. Ethan. It came again closer. He turned his head. Through the trees, a figure moved against the storm. Small but determined, stumbling, calling his name again and again. Mara. She fell beside him, breathless cheeks red with frost. I told you not to come back, he managed. You didn't tell me to forget you, she said, pulling her scarf around his neck. I followed Rex's scent. He led me here. Her words broke, but she kept working, wrapping his wound with strips torn from her coat. You have to go, he whispered. They're coming. Then let them, she said fiercely. I'm not leaving you. He wanted to argue, but her eyes held the same stubborn fire that had carried them this far. In the distance, sirens began to echo faintly through the valley, far but coming. The sound mingled with the wind, rising and falling like the tide. Ethan felt her hands on his small and warm against the cold. You'll be okay, she said. We both will. He closed his eyes, not from pain, but peace. Maybe he murmured. Just promise me one thing. Anything she said. Keep telling their names, he whispered. That's how we stay alive. His voice faded with the snow. Mara held his hand tighter, refusing to let go her breath, a steady rhythm against the silence, until the flashing lights cut through the gray, and the world at last began to move again. Spring came late that year, slow and careful, as if the earth itself had been holding its breath. The snow melted in threads running down from the ridge in clear rivulets that caught the sunlight like glass. The valley smelled of wet pine and thawing soil. On the edge of that valley stood a cabin rebuilt from its own ashes. New logs fitted against old foundations. A chimney of river stone rising clean and strong. The sign by the front step read, "Rex's Rest," carved into a plank of cedar and sanded smooth by small, patient hands. Mara came there often, walking the path that wound through the birches. Her boots left prints in the soft ground, but the wind always erased them by dusk. She carried a small bag over her shoulder filled with letters she would never send, and one she always read. It had been 3 months since the rescue. Sheriff Rowland was gone, found guilty by the recordings Ethan had sent before the snow took him. The county spoke of it in half-whispers, as if saying his name might invite the past to return. But people remembered who had told the truth, and they rebuilt the cabin with quiet reverence, plank by plank, as if repairing more than wood. Mara now lived in town with Deputy Green and his wife, who had no children of their own. They treated her not as charity, but as kin. She went to school, learned to laugh without looking over her shoulder, and kept Rex's collar hanging by her window. On mornings when the frost still kissed the grass, she'd whisper his name into the cold air, the way Ethan had taught her to speak to the ones who never leave. Today she had come alone. The path was muddy, the air bright with the promise of rain. At the cabin door she paused, touching the frame, feeling the warmth of the wood under her palm. The place smelled of cedar smoke and memory. Inside the table stood where it always had a lamp and a folded blanket beside it. She lit the small stove and waited for the familiar hiss of flame. A young German shepherd pup stretched from the corner, blinking sleepily. His coat was black and tan like Rex's, though his eyes were lighter, curious, and kind. She knelt and scratched his ears. "Come on, Ash," she said softly. "He'd want you to see this." The puppy wagged his tail and followed her outside where the grass had begun to green. Mara sat on the porch steps and unfolded the envelope she had carried since winter. The paper was worn at the edges, the handwriting careful, the kind of hand that belongs to a man who thinks before he speaks. The postmark read, "The day before the blizzard." She had found it among the belongings returned from the rescue site, sealed dry, waiting. She had read it only once, and every time since she had to gather courage again to read it aloud. The letter began simple, like his voice used to sound when he said her name. "Mara, if you're reading this, it means the storm has passed. I don't know what's left of me in your world, but I know what I want left of you. When you breathe, make the breath count. Don't waste it on fear. When you love with the part of your heart that still remembers loss, that's the truest kind of love. Don't let the world teach you silence. Speak the names that matter. Build what I never finished. We don't rebuild the world in one lifetime, but we start one soul at a time. You and I, we start here." Her fingers tightened around the page, and her eyes blurred as she whispered the words again. Ash pressed his head against her knee, the weight of him grounding her in the moment. "We start here," she echoed. She looked toward the ridge where the last snow still clung to the shade. Somewhere beneath it lay the tracks of that long night softened by seasons untouchable now. The pain was still there, but it no longer hollowed her. It had shape, purpose, direction, like a scar healed clean. Later, she walked to the small stone marker behind the cabin. The inscription was plain, "Rex loyal until the end." She laid a sprig of wildflowers beside it, the first bloom of the thaw, yellow and stubborn. "He'd like you," she told the pup. "You've got his eyes." The puppy barked once sharp and joyful, then nosed the flowers as if approving. Mara smiled. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and the far-off murmur of the river swelling with meltwater. She looked up, and for a moment she could almost see Ethan standing there, just a shape in the light coat collar turned up, that half-smile on his face. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. Some presences aren't meant to fade. When the first drops fell, she gathered the letter, folded it carefully, and slipped it back into her pocket. The rain made a sound like applause on the roof, soft and steady. Ash ran in circles, chasing the falling drops, his bark echoing across the open land. Mara stood at the edge of the porch, breathing the damp air, her heart full but calm. "We're okay," she said quietly, as if speaking to all who had gone before. "We're still building." The wind caught her words and carried them out across the valley, where they mingled with the sound of rain and the faint echo of a loyal bark remembered. As dusk fell, the cabin glowed like a lantern in the mist. Smoke curled from its chimney, a promise against the coming night. Mara sat by the window, the pup asleep at her feet. The letter open once more on the table. The words seemed to breathe with her. "We build again, one soul at a time." Outside, the rain turned to snowlight, and slow, the kind that doesn't stay long, but reminds the world how to be clean again. She watched it fall until darkness softened the edges of everything, and for the first time since that winter night, the silence felt like peace, not absence. Before you go, tell me what you think really happened out there in the Montana snow. Was Ethan right to break the law to protect her? Or would you have done it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. If you want more stories carved from storm silence and second chances, hit that subscribe button and stay with us for the next one. Don't just watch, be part of the story.